Well, good morning. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us. You know, I like to keep a fair amount of peas and beans canned and on the shelf ready for meals. I especially like to have green peas, we call them English peas, on the shelf. And being in Georgia, they're kind of hard to grow. So for me, I just buy them dried and then can them up. So I do some in pints and some in half pints. They're so handy to have on the shelf, and I thought I would show you how to do that. Before we start, just a quick reminder, give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Click the little bell to get notifications when we post new videos. Now let's get started. Now these are done by the National Center for Home Food Preservation's dry beans and peas recipe, and I'm going to post the link for you in the info section. And those directions cover any kind of dried peas or beans, but I want to be real clear to you what I'm canning here. These are just dried green peas. They're available at Walmart, most grocery stores, Amazon. The brand I'm using is called Food to Live, and they're organic peas, not split peas. Split peas make a soup, and they have a whole different set of canning directions. These are whole green peas. So the directions say 5 pounds for a canner load of 7 quarts, and 3¼ pounds for a canner load of 9 pints. My canner holds 10 pints. Now, I have found over the years that those quantities are never exactly right, because peas and beans vary in size and how much water they will absorb. But I'm going to start with the measurements that they give for 3¼ pounds for a canner load of pints. Now, a word of warning here. If you surf the internet for your canning directions, which is not a good idea, you may find that someone somewhere will tell you how to can dried peas and beans without rehydrating them first. That's not a good idea. And full disclosure, I know it's not a good idea because I tried it many years ago. Before I understood how it was unsafe, I ended up with jars of bean bricks, which made me do some research, and I realized that this was unsafe. You know, when you know better, you do better. So what I'm going to show you today is the safe method for canning dried peas, and this works for Crowder peas, field peas, whatever dried peas you like the best. Note here that if you're growing fresh peas that you harvest out of your own garden or that you buy at the farmer's market, they have a different set of canning directions. These are the directions for only dried peas. So I have weighed out 3 pounds 4 ounces, and I'm going to show you how to rehydrate them. I've washed them and picked out any bad peas, and I have a pot of water boiling here. This is a quick soak method. You want to use about 3 cups of water for every cup of peas. At this stage, it really doesn't matter. You just want to make sure they're covered well. And when my peas come back to a boil, I'll set my timer for 2 minutes, and I'm going to let them boil for 2 minutes. I'm going to give them a quick stir here first just to make sure they're all separated nicely. This is an 8-quart pot. You want a big pot to do this because they're going to swell up and double or triple in size. So start out with a big pot. After they boil for 2 minutes, and I mean you want it to come to a rolling boil, put the lid on the pot, turn the heat off, set your time for an hour. We're going to let them soak and rehydrate for an hour. After the hour's soak, I'm going to rinse these beans and cold water, put them back in the pot, cover them up, and boil them for 30 minutes. No, I didn't show you that because handling the big pot of water and the camera has gotten too difficult. While the peas are cooking for that last 30 minutes, I'll get all my canning equipment together. I'll meet you back over at the counter. So here is all my canning equipment, and I like to go through everything before I actually start putting food in the jars. I've counted out 10 rings here. I've got my big scoop, got a little vinegar there, my jar lifters. I've got some chopsticks that I use to debubble. I've got my lids in hot, not boiling, hot water. Now I'm going to show you a little step that I always do, and a lot of people don't do, but I recommend you do. I take the extra step to check and clean the inside of my rings with vinegar. I have found that no matter how well you wash these, in the little creases, the little bends from manufacturing, you can get a little bit of buildup. You can also get little tiny spots of rust that you might not notice with just a casual inspection. So I dip a paper towel into a little bit of vinegar. You know, I have the jar rims anyway. And I find that you can almost always get just a little bit of rust or residue. So I just always take the extra, I don't know, maybe 2 minutes to inspect the rings and to clean away any possible residue or rust with a little bit of vinegar. And I have here one extra piece of equipment. For doing peas and beans, you'll find a slotted spoon to be very helpful. Everything's ready. Let's get started. I've got my jars in hot water in a container in my sink, and I've emptied one out. Got my funnel. Using the slotted spoon, I'm going to put the peas in the jar without any liquid. I'm doing that because I don't want to fill the peas all the way to the 1-inch headspace mark. The directions say to fill the jar loosely. I'll explain. These peas have been rehydrated, but once they're cooked under pressure in the jars, they're going to rehydrate more. They're going to swell up. And I've actually never mastered the trick of getting the exact right amount of peas or beans in a jar so that they don't soak up so much water. But I usually go about 1.5 inches instead of 1 inch with the peas or beans. Then I finish filling the jar up to the 1-inch headspace with the cooking water. And by the way, if you run out of cooking water, you can just use fresh water. These are a different brand jars from what I normally use. These are Anchor Hocking, and so I measured for the 1-inch headspace just to be sure. Now the peas are in, and I'm going to finish filling up to the 1-inch headspace with the cooking water. And I don't want to belabor this, but I could have left 2 inches of headspace with the peas themselves, because when I'm done here, these are a little drier than I would have liked. It's really hard to know exactly how much water dried beans and peas will absorb. At this point, you can add either a 1/2 teaspoon of salt for pints or 1 teaspoonful for quarts. I'm not adding salt to mine. We want to clean the rims with a little bit of vinegar on a paper towel. And you do want to debubble. I use chopsticks for that, and I actually think I forgot to do it on this one. I'll make sure I do it on the next one. Then I'll take a lid out of the warm water, center it on the jar, and take my pre-cleaned ring here. And I always give my rings a couple of turns backwards. And if they're in round, they'll just pop down before I start tightening them. Finger tight. Turn it until the jar moves, then using just your fingers, give it a little bit more turn. The strength in just your fingers is less than the strength in your whole hand. That's what finger tight means. Then I place this jar in a canner. I'm holding it at about 140 degrees. That's a low heat. We want to prevent thermal shock, so we do this one jar at a time. Hot food into a hot jar into a hot canner. I'm going to do just one more just to show you the finger tight. Let me just skip to that point. Okay, my jar is filled. I'm going to debubble. And really with the peas packed loosely like this, you don't get a lot of bubbles, but just in case, we'll debubble. Then our paper towel with vinegar. And then our lid. I'm actually using a combination of lids here, Anchor Hocking and Ball. And then turn the lid backwards until it seats itself. You can feel the little pop down. And then turn forward until your jar starts to move, and then hold it and just a tiny bit more, maybe a 1/4 inch, until you feel resistance, and then into the canner. When all my jars are in, I turn the heat up to high as it'll go, and put my lid on. USDA calls for 2 to 3 inches of water in the canner. In this video, I'm not going to go through every step of the canning process, but I will post a link at the end that you can click on that will take you through all the steps. If you're fairly new to canning, I suggest you watch that. Now this is how many peas I had left over that would not fit into the 10-pint jars. You could either can these in a batch of 1/2 pints or have them for dinner, or add them to the next batch if you're doing more. So these have processed for the appropriate time, 1 hour and 15 minutes. Again, if you're fairly new to canning, I urge you to watch the video I'm going to link at the end of this one. So I'm going to remove these carefully and place them on this silicone cutting board I keep for this purpose, because you don't want to bump them against anything hard like your counter or your stove. Once they're out of the canner, we're going to leave them undisturbed for 12 to 24 hours. If you've ever wondered why the direction says 12 to 24 hours, it means they need to stay undisturbed at least 12 hours. And that if you check them before 24 hours and find that a jar hasn't sealed, it may safely be refrigerated or reprocessed. So let's look a little more closely at these. If you'll remember, I said, boy, we could have gone with 2 inches of peas before we added the liquid. But that varies so much it's kind of hard to predict. The thing to remember is that as long as you have 1/2 a jar of liquid, your product is safe. So it's been over 12 hours. I just got up, and we're going to check these for proper sealing. You can see that overnight, some of them soaked up some more water, but they still have a safe amount of water. And understand, this is not from siphoning. These didn't siphon. This is because the peas just continued to soak up water. You see how they've crept up into the head space. Something for you to watch for is that peas and beans are particularly starchy, and as these sit on your shelf, you may see clouding at the bottom. That's an accumulation of starch. It's really nothing for you to worry about. So as I'm taking off the rings, I'm checking to make sure that the seals have all popped down. If you press on them, they don't go up and down. They stay concave. And then I will go through and pick up each jar, just holding my fingers on the lid. And you'll see I let the full weight of the jar pull down. And these are all sealed. Next, I'll wash the jars in cool water, dry them off, and label them. Then do a little happy dance, because I've got 10 jars of goodness on the shelf whenever I want them. Whether you're an experienced canner or if you're just starting out, canning dried peas and beans is easy and in the long run will save you a lot of time. I hope you give it a try. And I hope to see you again tomorrow on Debbie's Back Porch.